Hey folks, this is Fernando doing another video for More Survivalists. I'd like to mention a few things, and this is because of an email that I got. It says, Fernando, an interesting thing happened recently in South Oregon, a conservative area with lots of preppers. Basically, a big wildfire hit a rural neighborhood well known as Klamath County for having lots of prepper and off-the-grid types. According to local media, people were forced to flee immediately ahead of flames twice as high as the pine trees. Immediately is all in caps, so one of those things to notice. Immediately, as in right that moment, you just leave. Maybe you just leave with the clothes in your back, and that's all you can get. Many lost everything, including preps. Miraculously, nobody died, but half of an area known variously as Moccasin Hill or Klamath Falls Forest Estate Number 1 was reduced to ash. Google Moccasin Hill Wildfire, Klamath County, Oregon for more info, and be aware that local media often limits on how many free articles you can read. Thought you'd like to know about it, especially considering the new release of your book about bugging out. This is from BC. Also in British Columbia in Canada, something similar happening with wildfires. Now, I'm getting lots of bug out type of emails is because of my book, Bugging Out and Relocating. The link to Amazon somewhere there below. I like this stuff because it's things that are actually happening, and as I always say, you learn so much more from actual real events than theorizing or making up stories or fantasizing about how you wish that things would end up happening. Alright, as our friend here mentions, this ended up happening in an area that is favored by survivalists or preppers. I'm not still not the idea of prepper is, but people that are into being self-reliant types. And there are a few interesting points that I'd like to mention and use this real-world example as a guide. First of all, some of the things that he mentions in this little email. This ended up happening in a rural neighborhood. All right. First thing, the idea of bad things, disasters, and people having to bug out of the cities. Remember, what are people from the cities going to be doing when they have to leave by the millions from these hellholes? Because only people in cities are supposed to be the ones that have to plan so as to bug out. This is something that we read and see in videos and in articles all the time. And sure, the prepper movement thing has exploded, and everyone has his or her own vision of things. Unfortunately, this happens a lot. People don't go by real events, and they end up making these theories about people in cities only have to bug out. This is an example of actually lots of people probably in a rural area specifically selected as an ideal location, and they still, because of circumstances beyond their control, ended up having to bug out. So number one would be that it's not where you live. It's a simple matter of complete preparedness to have plans ahead of time in case you can no longer stay wherever it is that you are. Doesn't matter if it's in New York City, doesn't matter if it's in Klamath County, Oregon. All right, you just don't know what ends up happening in life, and it may be a wildfire like in this case, it may be a terrorist attack, maybe in a larger city like New York, maybe a personal situation of your own. House fires, normal, happen all the time. What about foreclosures or personal financial disasters where you just cannot afford to pay your mortgage or pay rent anymore, or debts basically force you out of wherever it is that you're living, and you don't have anywhere else to go. These things happen by the thousands all day long, every single day. It's not maybe as flashy, it's not maybe as newsworthy. We see it more as numbers and unemployment statistics or poverty, but on each individual person, on each personal story, these things happen every single day. So you just cannot have a complete preparedness plan if you don't have an idea of what is that you're going to be doing if you have to leave wherever it is that you are. If you haven't gone through that thought process, you haven't prepared to a full extent. You're ignoring maybe one of the less likely scenarios, and we're going to be getting into that in a second, but it is a pretty bad position to be in, losing wherever it is that you are and having nowhere else to go. You need to do that ahead of time. At least go through the uncomfortable exercise of looking around and saying, damn, if I lose everything and only have the shirt on my back, what would I be doing? All right. Second is this idea of you being in your bug out location already. All right. You just cannot be there. It's against the definition itself of bug out location. Bug out location is where you go when your primary place of residence is compromised. Doesn't matter if it's in a flat in New York City. Doesn't matter if it's a homestead in Oregon, in Klamath County. If that place is no longer an option for you to be living in, you need to find somewhere else. You need another bug out location. You can never live in your bug out location. The moment you're living in it, it's no longer your bug out location. You cannot bug out there because that's where you're leaving. That's a place you're no longer being capable of staying in. All right. But again, you see this a lot. I already moved to my bug out location. I'm never going to be having to leave, right? Because I'm already in my homestead. I have my stuff. I have my garden, my orchard, whatever it is that it is. I have my place where I'm going to be making my stand. If things go wrong, I'm pretty well set. That's so fantastic. That's so perfect and great. If you have a place that you love living in, especially if it's one where you have a certain degree of self-sufficiency, especially when you have, it's nice to have some land so as to do projects and such, if you're growing some of your own food and all that. But it's a position that means you still have to find somewhere else to go to if that place burns down, you end up losing it because of debt, or a flood ruins it for you, or a volcano erupts and covers the thing in 2 feet of ash, which has happened before, could happen again. Actually, I was talking with my wife the other day about being in Buenos Aires, and in a matter of like 4 or 5 years having problems with smoke or volcano ash for different reasons. We were in Buenos Aires, and the city ended up getting covered in smoke because of wildfires. Not that different from the ones from what people in Oregon have been suffering, but those fires outside of the city, and because of the wind, basically the smoke from those fires just covered Buenos Aires for a long time. It was actually pretty nasty to be in the city with that smoke, right? So it could affect you in the city, it could affect you in the country. It really does not change. There's certain disasters that are a little bit more likely to happen in some places. For example, a terrorist attack, because of what a terrorist would actually be trying to target. You could say you're more likely to suffer it in a city than in the middle of nowhere, right? Sure. A wildfire, you have certain places that, because of the overgrown vegetation, they're more likely to happen. Floods, you have the same thing. You have cities that flood more often. You have places in the country that flood very often. Actually, in general, of course there are exceptions, but in general, cities are usually settled in and set in places that have shown a certain amount of resilience, right? Cities that have been standing for hundreds of years usually are in places where they're not where the geography is not that fragile, where it's not as likely to be flooded. Now, what you see happening, and this is something that's going to be happening more and more, is that sometimes developers end up building or end up urbanizing or settling a property for sale. This can happen in rural locations as well. If you recently bought a property, and you haven't looked through it, there's always a possibility that even in the country you get completely flooded and covered with water. Happens all the time. So yeah, you have certain events that are more more likely to happen in some places than others, but it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It doesn't mean that cities are awful, anywhere in the country is great. Some places clearly have an advantage if you select a location where you have where natural disasters, earthquakes, floods, fires, and whatnot. If you're not that close to a river that sometimes overflows and such, you can somewhat select a place that is a little bit less likely to suffer these sort of things. But that doesn't mean that something may not end up happening that just forces you out of wherever it is that you are. All right, so that is definitely something to look into. Then about something that caught my attention as well, and I mentioned the caps for forced to flee immediately ahead of the flames twice as high as pine trees. Immediately. Sometimes you don't have time. Sometimes you have to leave. There's a very impressive little clip in YouTube floating around. I'm seen it some time ago when the tsunami hit Japan. You see the wave of water just washing into the city and pretty much destroying everything, and you see this house and this guy running out of the house through the back door just as the wave reaches the house and levels it, and the guy makes a run for it. And I mean, it's just seconds. It's a handful of seconds between life and death, right? Tsunamis, it may happen with a fire as well. I've done videos before, I've done written articles before about how fast fires spread, and don't remember the name of the nightclub where it happened, but it was actually filmed live when the fire started, and you see that it's less than 60 seconds that from the moment that the fire actually starts, less than 60 seconds you have the entire place engulfed in flames and people being crushed to death because of that. So sometimes you have time, sometimes you don't. There's no little manual written. This is something that we have to understand. There's no little manual on ideal situations where you will be bugging out exactly the way you want it. And there's no little manual of, yeah, if you're in the city, you will have to bug out. But if you're in the country, you will never have to bug out of anywhere because you're already in your bug out location. Bullshit. It may happen to you as well. And finally, something that he mentions here in the email as well about many lost everything, including preps, right? Think about that for a second. How much importance do we place on stuff, right? And not only stuff, on the setup that you may have, especially when you invest time, money, almost a lifetime put into a place where you are hoping to live maybe the rest of your life. You have things exactly the way you want. You have your greenhouse, your food being grown, or your animals, and you have your solar panels or whatnot. You have things just the way you want, and suddenly losing everything. That has to be crushing emotionally. It must be very difficult to cope with, but it's something that we have to understand. At the end of the day, it's just stuff, and stuff is not nearly as important as people. We see it all the time, people repeating like skills are more important than gear and supplies and such, but sometimes we lose a little bit of perspective, and we focus too much on stuff. And if it ever has to come down to that, don't even think about it. It's a decision that quick, and never try to convince yourself otherwise. If you have to leave somewhere because it's not safe anymore, stuff is definitely not worth your life, and it's not going to be doing any difference if a fire is heading your way. But that's another interesting exercise to do. What if you lost absolutely everything that you have? What you would be doing? What would you be doing if you have moved to this homestead in Oregon or wherever it may be, and you think you're fully settled, you will never be leaving that because you're already in your bug out location, mistake that we just explained. If you have to leave and you have nothing, what would you be doing? When you start thinking that way, and for a lot of people this is a very uncomfortable exercise to even think about, but once you start thinking of it that way, what if I actually lost everything in my home? I had nothing but the clothes on my back and what's in my pockets. Then you would be saying, well, the first obvious answer would be, I wish I had something somewhere else. I wish I had maybe a backpack or a couple of boxes with some basic necessities, some essential supplies, you know, a spare set of clothes in a box with someone else's house or some family that I have. You know, leave a few basic supplies with someone else, maybe leave copies of important documents, maybe leave a USB drive with some of my important files for work that I really need and I would be very hard pressed having to do without. Maybe leave a copy of that with someone that I trust, with someone that I know I can count on when things get ugly. Someone who I've talked, which is something that I do explain in my book, someone with whom I already had that conversation. If I lose everything, if I have nowhere to go, can I go to your place? Don't assume everything. Actually have that conversation. If the answer to that is yes, and maybe you have an arrangement of your own where that person can count on you as well, and you have that that deal between you two, then you can start thinking of, okay, I'm going to be leaving this backpack here with you. I'm going to be leaving nothing too expensive, nothing too crazy, nothing that I would be hurting a lot if I lose it, but at least some stuff that would make life easier for me. You know, even something as simple as some old clothes. If you arrive to your real bug out location, your parents, your children's, your uncles, whatever place it is that has become now your real bug out location, because wherever it is that you used to live has not become an option for you anymore. When you get there, you have a set of your actual clothes to put on you and wear. You have some documents and files as to go for making the claims for the insurance company or whatnot, or to continue working, some of the information that you need for that. That's the kind of thing that will help you if it ever ends up this way, losing wherever it is that you're living in. That would be a good exercise of real bug out scenarios. Folks, that's all for now. I'm going to be doing another video right after this one, actually, about when you don't have to bug out. And that's kind of a contradiction, but when you see the following video, you'll see that it does make sense. Folks, remember to subscribe, like the video. If you did like it, share it. See you on our next video. Have a great day.